Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. Today's show is brought to you by Daylight. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is our editor-in-chief, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. We've got more of I guess, I don't know if you would call it a more well-rounded group of stories this week because, we don't have reviews of operating systems or hardware this week, but we've got some apps. We've got some cool stuff this week. I want to dig into it.
We do. So you covered Safari extensions. So spoiler alert, we're going to do an episode of App Stories all about Safari extensions where we talk about this a little more in depth, but you did a story on the website. So what can you tell me about this story?
Well, I can tell you that there are a lot of good Safari extensions. It took me a long time to go through all these because, I could have made just a long list of things, of apps that people sent to us and sent us links to, but I wanted to really try them all. So I have, it's like more than a dozen of these where I've gone through, tried them all, taken screenshots, and come up with what I think are really the best ones there. Things for customizing web pages or utilities like 1Password, or for using with video on the web, all sorts of different things that make the experience of using Safari better. And what's nice is that it turns out this is a very popular category for developers. And I think it's really starting to revitalize the utility category because, utilities were one of the categories that have been left out in a lot of ways from a lot of the App Store innovations. They don't really fit subscriptions very well. At least most of them don't. If they're kind of a single purpose thing, utilities just has been a little bit sleepy for a while, but now with extensions, it breathes new life into it, gives developers something new to talk about. And a lot of these have done a terrific job. So I'm really happy to see them all.
Yeah, it's fun to browse the App Store and just spend some money trying something new. It makes it feel like, the old era of widgets and extensions when they were new and you were just wanted to try them all from the App Store.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of widgets, you also wrote about the latest update to Carrot Weather, version 5.4, which adds support for some of the new features of iOS and iPadOS 15, more specifically time-sensitive notifications, which you can fully configure in the app's settings for different kinds of alerts, but also XL widgets on iPad. And you talked about how with the XL size widget in Carrot Weather for things like the weather forecast, the weather radar view, you get a big chunk of your location in Illinois, but also Michigan and Wisconsin?
Good. And Indiana and Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. It's really, I was looking at the map and I realized it's about 500 miles wide and 200 miles north to south. So it's a really big area that it covers. And that's nice if you want to see a storm system rolling into your area, I suppose. But besides that map widget, there's also an XL forecast widget, which for a lot of people, I think they might install that and never open Carrot again because it's got, it's got a long range forecast. It's got an hourly forecast. It's got the current conditions. It's got the sunrise and sunset and the moon phase. It's got a whole bunch of different data points all built into it. So if you're on an iPad and you want to have a page dedicated largely to the weather, you can do that now too. And it's very well done. The other feature, Federico, that's worth mentioning is in 5.0, you probably remember how Brian Mueller added cards, which are these data points for different weather conditions that you could not only pick what the data is that you wanted displayed in your custom layout, but you could pick a threshold. So you could say, I want to know about the UV index, but only if it's above 6. Or I want to know about the rain, but only if it's going to rain more than a quarter inch. That sort of thing. And then if those things, if those conditions were met, those cards would show up on the page in the app. Brian Mueller has done something very similar with the Apple Watch, where there's a special smart data point complication where you can set up the same sorts of things for it's like the large center complication on the infograph modular version for sure, because that's where I tested it out. And you can set up a whole bunch of these different data points. There's a long list you can pick from. And then as conditions change throughout the day and the conditions are met, it'll show up on your Apple Watch. So that's really cool too. So another great release from Brian Mueller on Carrot Weather. It's amazing that there's this much that could be actually built into here. I mean, there's even, new designs in this version too for things like the hourly and the daily forecast, and as well as themes that you can apply and different icon sets for the different weather conditions.
Yeah, very nice. I like that. What else? So I linked a story this week on MacStories about Chris Welch's problems with the iPadOS 15 home screen.
Right.
Chris wrote about it on The Verge, and I feel like this kind of issue resonates with me because I know that I wrote about it in my iPadOS 15 section of the review. Now, the problem that Chris explains here is a real problem, which is it used to be in iPadOS 14, the old version, that you could keep the same grid layout for icons on the home screen in both landscape and portrait orientation on your iPad. That's no longer the case in 15 because those icons reflow when you change your device orientation, right? And sure, you can put together separate layouts for both orientations. This is like a very confusing and potentially useful feature that Apple did not explain at all.
No, they didn't.
You can keep I don't know if it's like a bug at this point or if it's like a feature that they forgot to mention, but iPadOS 15 remembers your icon and widget layouts in portrait and landscape modes separately, but they don't explain this at all. So Chris basically says, so I used to be on iPadOS 14 and I had all of my icons carefully arranged by row, so that I had a row of media apps and then a row of photography apps and so forth. After upgrading to 15, Apple just decided to throw in a bunch of widgets on my home screen, ruining my carefully assembled layout, instead of providing me with some sort of like video explanation or onboarding tutorial. But also, they no longer made it possible for me to always keep the same layout in both portrait and landscape. And not only that, but there's the second problem to this, which is also what I mentioned in my iPadOS 15 review, which is as soon as you add one widget to your iPad home screen, the density of the home screen goes way down.
Right.
Because the grid is more spaced out. And so go read Chris's article on The Verge. He makes some really good points. And ultimately, his conclusion is something that I also believe. There should be more customization here. Apple still has this very rigid grid system in place on iPad, and it should be more similar to Android. And I agree with that, where you have more control over the placement of your widget, over just, how much icons are spaced out, for example. And
right.
I wish there was more customization for power users.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's such a chunky grid in the sense that you really don't have any fine-grained control over things like spacing or how close it is to the edge of the screen and that sort of thing, which I think, it's nice to have everything in neat, orderly rows, but you can give people more customization and fine-grained control about spacing and things like that and still allow them to be in neat, orderly rows. That's still a thing that would be possible if it was changed. So yeah, it'd be nice to see more control there as well. Federico, we also got this week updates to the iWork apps, both on iOS and iPadOS, as well as the Mac. And these were no small updates. I mean, Apple didn't really talk about these before they were launched. And there's a lot going on here. So with Pages, for instance, you have a new screen view on the iPhone, which, I don't know that a lot of people are necessarily doing a lot of editing of Pages documents on their iPhone. But if you're commuting or something like that and you need to make some edits, it's great to be able to do this sort of thing on the iPhone. And Pages has been on the iPhone for a very long time. But what Screen View does is it gets, for instance, the images out of the way and spreads the text out border to border so that you can see the text and edit it a lot more easily in screen view. You can always drop back to the preview version and see what the layout of the document looks like, but it's very useful on a smaller screen like that. And then Numbers got pivot tables, which I'm not going to explain to you what those are, Federico, because I know that they're fancy things that people who use spreadsheets like and have been in Excel for a very long time. And people have always complained that they weren't in Numbers, but they can't complain anymore. They're going to have to find another thing to complain about with Numbers because they now have pivot tables. So you can do whatever the fanciness is that pivot tables allow you to do. And then finally, we've got Keynote. And Keynote now includes another one of those features that seems like kind of a tail end of the pandemic feature, which is the ability to have live video inside a Keynote presentation. So you can present remotely and have your face on the screen talking as you do that. And it's a really well done feature. And I think notwithstanding the pandemic, I think that this is a feature that will work really well for remote conferences, for remote learning, for anybody who wants to do things like screencasts or online video. There's a lot of use cases here that I think people will start using because Keynote is a very powerful presentation tool, and the ability to add video to it on top of that, including multiple camera views on the Mac and using iPhones and iPad screens alongside the video, is really, really useful tool. And I think a lot of people will be able to take advantage of that.
Very nice.
All right, Federico, this was one of those big Club MacStories weeks because we had both an issue of the monthly log and of MacStories Weekly. What did you write about in the log this week?
And your Macintosh desktop experience column.
That's true. I shouldn't forget about that. It was almost 3,400 words that I cranked out for that. Yes.
All right. So
why don't you start with the monthly log, and then I'll move on to my story.
So in the monthly log, I wrote about my custom setup for Apple Music in Marvis Pro. So Marvis is an excellent third-party Apple Music client that is highly customizable, and it lets you customize the main screen, the main page of the app by making custom sections and reordering all those sections on the main page so that you can craft your own personalized music listening and browsing experience. This is an incredibly customizable application, and I wrote about how I made a section for recently added albums and loved songs, or how I can sort my playlists by date added and quickly shuffle those. It's an incredible utility if you are a music person, if you need music in your life as much as I do, and if you think the default music app on iPhone and iPad leaves a lot to be desired, go check out Marvis and go check out the examples that I shared because it's really well done and it's on iPhone and iPad, so you can set it up on both devices and you can exchange the settings, the preferences between them, so you only need to do the setup once and then you can set it up quickly on the other device. And then you, John, speaking of setting things up, you wrote about setting up your devices from scratch instead of doing, the restore from a backup.
Right.
And I want to point out this story. I don't want to spoil it, but John shares how many apps he had installed on his iPhone before. And then people wonder why, John and his apps is like a recurring meme on App Stories. This is why. It
is why. And it's kind of, I think, maybe at an all-time high. And I don't know. I'd like to think that we can still work together and be friends, Federico, after I made this really startling and disturbing admission.
It is a disturbing admission. Yes, that's what it is.
All right. Well, I decided that it would be easier, and I think you would probably agree after hearing about what was on my iPhone, to just start fresh and install only the apps that I needed as I needed them, because I wanted to not only do that and clean out all that cruft, but I also wanted to rethink my home pages, especially now with focus modes. I want to think about how I'm using those in combination with home screens and home screens that only show up in certain focus modes and that sort of thing. And so I'm doing that on the iPhone. And then the iPad mini, because it's just such a different device compared to my iPad Pro that I use, I wanted to set it up to be primarily a downtime device, something for when I'm reading or watching video or I don't know, listening to some music. And so I wanted to take the approach of having dedicated sections for each of those activities, and then have the ability to drop into more work type stuff if needed, but not have it there like right in my face, because I don't want to be disturbed by that sort of thing when I'm using my Mini usually. So I talked about my approach to both of those things. It's still very much a work in process. And eventually I'll be sharing my screens, my home screens, with Club MacStories members in a future issue of Weekly once it's all set up.
Nice.
The other thing this week, Federico, that I wrote was the Macintosh Desktop Experience, which is my column for Club MacStories Plus and Club Premier members. And this is a continuation of the very first column that I wrote in the series, which is all about the Loop Deck Live, which is this device that's an accessory to the Mac that it's a little bit like a Stream Deck, but I like it better. It has both dials and buttons on it that you can tie to apps and shortcuts and Apple scripts and folders and web pages and all sorts of things, creating macros that help you get your work done. And so last time I really talked about the hardware itself and what it's capable of. This time I really dove deep into exactly what it is I'm doing with it, between things like Obsidian, as well as certain projects, whether it's working on club things or writing or doing ad sales, whatever it happens to be. I've got a page for it in the Loop Deck Live that launches apps and websites and other things and helps me get my work done. So hopefully that gives people some ideas about how maybe they could add that to their lives as well.
Very nice. Yeah, I love that column and that story, and seeing how you set it up. It's so inspiring, and I wish that I could also use it on iPad, but it's not supported.
So do I. So do I. We also had an issue of MacStories Weekly. What did you write about this week?
In MacStories Weekly, I shared something that I discovered recently thanks to a Discord member for the Club MacStories Plus Discord, which is how you can use the latest version of Working Copy, the excellent Git client for iPhone and iPad, to access hidden files and folders on iOS, which has never been possible before using the Files app, and how you can take advantage of that to manually install plugins in Obsidian, such as the ones that we released in September for Club MacStories Plus members, but just in general, how you can access hidden folders in Obsidian or not on your iPhone and iPad using Working Copy. And I also made a shortcut for that. So there's an explanation of the feature, but also a shortcut that simplifies the process. I am so happy that this feature exists, and I wrote about it in MacStories Weekly.
Yeah, it's really, really fantastic. And I kind of wish that I had your shortcut a few days ago when I installed those plugins myself. But I use the Mac because it's just easier to do. But now it's really just about as easy with your shortcut as it would be on the Mac. So that's really nice to have. I wrote about Craft because we have never featured that as a MacStories Recommends on MacStories Weekly. And, I think a lot of people wonder, do we still use Craft? Because you and I are both using Obsidian quite a bit. And the answer is yes. We're doing it for the show notes of this very episode as we record. And we're using it for all kinds of development stuff with Alex. Yeah. And we're using it for organizing big projects like coverage of new apps coming out after iOS 15. So there are a lot of things that we use it for, and it's mostly for the sharing features. So I thought we ought to talk about that because the app has come a long way since I last wrote about it, and I wanted to highlight some of those new features. Then, Federico, on App Stories this week, it seems like it was a long time ago that we recorded this one, and I guess it was, but we talked all about your iPad mini review. And I got to say, when we recorded that, I didn't have the mini in my hands yet. It came the next day, and I have absolutely loved having this device. I've been doing a lot of reading on it so far, but I was really surprised at just how good music sounds on it, even just coming out of the 4 speakers on the iPad mini. It's certainly not the kind of deep, full tone that you get on an iPad Pro, but if you're not listening to something really loud and you just want to have a little music and don't feel like airplaying it to anything, it's just a really nice way to get to listen to music. It's certainly better than the speakers on an iPhone, for instance, I think. So I've really enjoyed that. And we go into a lot of the different things about your review, about the screen and about the form factor and the kinds of apps it's good for. So definitely worth checking out that episode if you haven't listened to it yet. All right, Federico, I want to tell you about our sponsor for this week, and that is Daylight. Daylight is for small businesses trying to stay on top of clients, leads, and projects that are evolving every single day. And it can be tough to do that, if not impossible to manage everything. With Daylight, though, it comes in the clutch. Daylight is an award-winning native CRM and business productivity app for the Mac, iPhone, and iPad that's designed to help you and your team manage more clients, close more deals, and finish more projects. Daylight is fully compatible with M1-powered Macs, and it works seamlessly with the Apple features that you already use and love, things like Apple Mail and Contacts and Calendar. It also leverages Siri and Caller ID on your iPhone, Face ID, Touch ID, and you can create contacts and other documents by pulling Daylight data into Pages, Numbers, and Keynote. What's more, all the information is accessible online and off. Combined with a sophisticated, elegant design that makes it easy to access and use your data on the go, Daylight is the complete package for your growing business. No matter what business you're in, Daylight can help you build stronger client relationships and scale your business. See what Daylight can do for your business today. Start your 30-day free trial by going to marketcircle.com. Our thanks to Daylight for their support of MacStories and Unwind. All right, Federico, I have just one quick arcade update for you, and that is Thumper Pocket Edition is coming out on Apple Arcade this very day. Yes, it's already out, in fact. It's Friday, and this is out, and this is a rhythm-based game that it won an Apple Design Award back in 2019, so it's not really been that long since this app came out originally, but it's on arcade now, which is fantastic, and it really is a classic. It's nice to see it on there. I don't think there are any other games out yet today that are big names, but it's good to see Thumper there. So check it out sometime.
That's a great game. I love it. All right, John, I know that you've been busy. You're working on your macOS review. You've been working on the Macintosh desktop experience part 2 this week. So I am going to swoop in and take care of your Unwind picks for this episode of Unwind.
Thank you.
First pick. Now, Sylvia probably wouldn't want me to pick this one. But the final season of Lucifer is out on Netflix. And the reason she wouldn't want me to pick this one is she was, and I'm going to say rightfully so, very disappointed by the series finale because Lucifer ended. Now, I'm still going to recommend it because on balance, I feel like it's a really good TV show. But look, there are always problems with these kinds of things, like series finale, like these big endings, right? You either get them extremely right or you get them extremely wrong, and you disappoint a lot of people. Now, I've been taking a look on Twitter. I searched on Twitter, and a lot of people, not just on Twitter, but also like I searched for TV show reviews on Google. A lot of people are very upset about how they handled the series finale for Lucifer. So, and I have to agree, unfortunately, the way they wrap things up at the very end is kind of lazy and uninspired. But, you know, these things happen, right? When you end TV shows. And I'm going to say that overall, it's still a fantastic show that you can watch on Netflix now. All the 6 seasons are out. In the final episode, there are some absolutely terrific, so well done music choices. I'm not going to spoil the very last song that you hear on Lucifer in the very last scene of the show. It's right, you know, perfect song for me. So some unfortunate choices, maybe with the writing, with some of the decisions for the storyline. Maybe we can talk about this with spoilers at some point, but you know, the finale maybe will disappoint you, maybe not, but on balance, overall, I still love this show. It's not going to change my overall opinion of 6 seasons of Lucifer. It's super fun. So that's on Netflix. Go watch it and judge for yourself whether you like the finale or not. But I recommend it. Like, I still recommend it. The second pick, music album. So new album by Angels and Airwaves. So this is the band by Tom DeLonge, formerly of Blink-182.
Right.
You may know Tom because of his work with the To the Stars Academy, which is an organization that is studying the UFO phenomena in the United States and beyond, collaborating with the US government. Tom made a career, surprisingly, out of this. Let me tell you, John, there's a whole community on Twitter.
Oh, I know. I know.
UFO Twitter is a thing, and it's fun to dip in and out and see what those folks are talking about from time to time. But Tom has been bringing his experience and his knowledge into Angels and Airwaves over the past few years. But this is the latest album, the new album by the band. The last record was from 7 years ago, from 2014. And this new one called Life Forms, obviously, as you can tell from the title, it infuses some of Tom's work with the To the Stars Academy organization into the music. And it's very enjoyable. Like, this is, I believe, like one of the best records that Angels and Airwaves have put out. Like, it's up there maybe with the first album, at least for me. Solid mix of lyrics and themes that you can expect from Tom DeLonge, obviously, but also like obviously the punk rock roots are there. More synths, more electronic sounds. It's very well balanced and it's fun and very enjoyable. Once again, a record that is 12 songs, like short, compact record that I can appreciate these days. I've mentioned this on the show before. I recommend it. Go have a listen if you like Blink-182 or if you like Angels and Airwaves from a few years ago. I think you're going to like this record.
That sounds really good. I know that I heard one of the singles on it and really liked it a lot myself, so I'll have to check out the full album. I didn't realize that it was out yet. All right, Federico, that's it for today. I want to thank our sponsor again. That is Daylight. You can find the two of us over on MacStories. And, of course, Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next Friday, Federico.
Ciao, John.